Well, we were asking if anybody in the room was alive and well in 1963. I was alive and well in the 90s, or as the teenagers call it, the late 20th century. The late 1900s was a crazy time. You and I are the same age, right? Like almost exactly the same age. You are not almost exactly my age, sir, Liam. Well, I will tell you kids, or anybody else who didn't live through the 90s was a wild time, okay? 90s humor was different than humor today. 90s humor involved a lot less effort because all you had to do was add Rooney or Roni at the end of something and it was immediately hilarious. Like, oh, I'm gonna go take a shower Rooney, or I'm gonna go eat a donut Roni. And people thought that was hilarious. It was a knee slapper. The other common 90s comedy trope was to say the opposite of what you actually thought and then just say not at the end of it. Like, oh, that was a great sandwich. Not. Or you could add psych, like, oh, Mom, I really love your shoes. Psych. Knee slappers, all. Another favorite one of people in the 90s was if somebody asked if they could do something, you would say, it's a free country. That was a common, it's a free country was commonly given if someone asked a question. And then finally, my favorite, which has to do with today's sermon. If someone brought a problem to you that you could not be bothered to help with, you would say, oh, that really sounds like a you problem. Does anybody remember that one from the 90s? Or a better question would be, if someone comes to you with a problem of their own design, you would say, why is that my problem? Or, and that's my problem, why? The 90s were a wild, wild time. The theme of my last two sermons here has been to attempt to persuade that our actions do indeed count, that no good deed is ever wasted. Though we may not be able to accurately predict the outcomes of our actions, it is a fact that all of our actions have consequences. Other people's problems are very much our problems, and our actions very much influence other people's lives beyond ours. Every you problem is also a me problem. There is hope for the future. The attention and action that you give to important issues is not time that is spent in vain. There is hope for a better, kinder, more equitable world. At Pizza Church on Thursday, we had a community discussion about community itself. What is community? What does it mean to belong to a community? And what we arrived at together as a group with the teenagers is that we are so entangled with one another that we are almost like one organism. Human beings are so inextricably connected that it's impossible for us to be truly individual. All of us as individuals are part of the community. We talked about Jesus' famous metaphor where he says, the hand cannot say to the ear, I have no need of you. Noses can't say to a stubbed toe when it screams out in pain, all body parts matter. Today is Martin Luther King Sunday. And King's philosophy was rooted in his understanding that human beings are bound to one another. Our fates are bound to one another, but also our well-being is bound to one another. Any pain that someone else experiences affects me. And any pain that I inflict on another person is also pain that I'm inflicting on ourselves. We are all part of the same body. King, in his book, Why We Cannot Wait, wrote, "Whenever a police dog sinks its teeth into the leg of a little girl in Birmingham, he sinks his teeth into the leg of every American." We are so bound to one another that you don't actually get a choice as to whether or not you are involved in the struggle for justice. Your actions, as well as your inactions and your apathy, matter. They count. And though we can't always predict how our actions will play out, we can predict with 100% certainty that they will have an effect. Reading today's Bible verse about Jesus' first miracle in the Gospel of John, there is a lot to this that can be missed by 21st century Americans. There's a subtle humor to this story that is lost in the English translation. To give you a little bit of background, Cana is a town that is literally like a stone's throw from Nazareth, where Jesus was raised. I went to Jerusalem, in Israel, Palestine with my dad when I was in seminary, and we took a tour of Nazareth. We got to see Jesus' hometown. We got to see the hill that the people threatened to throw Jesus off of unless he decided to become king immediately, right? We got to see that spot. And then we got in our tour bus, and they said, okay, now we're going to go to Cana. And I thought, great, I'm exhausted. I'm going to take a nap. So I put in my headphones, and I lay my head down to sleep, and I hadn't even gotten through one song when I heard over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived in Cana." It is literally like a 5-minute drive down the hill. It's so close. And so Jesus and his mother and his disciples are all invited to a wedding of an unnamed person. And Jesus' mother, Mary, notices that the party is out of wine. And so what does she say to Jesus? She says, "They're out of wine." Very subtle, the type of thing that a mother might say to a son when things need to be done. She doesn't give all the details, but he knows what she's saying. She's saying, Jesus, perform a miracle and help this poor family who is out of wine, right? It's subtle. And what does Jesus say in return? Well, he says, "Woman, yeah, what is it to you and me? Like, why does that matter? Like, this isn't my wedding, right? You're not the host. Why am I going to meddle in this? Like, why would I do a miracle at a party? Mom," he says, "this isn't my time." So what he's saying is, Mom, I've not done a miracle yet, and you want me to do my first one at a wedding, turning water to wine? I can do way better than that. Mom, don't let this be my first miracle. He calls her woman, and in English that has a negative connotation. If you make the mistake of referring to a woman as woman, you will rightly be chastised for that. In Greek, this is not a diminutive name or a put down. This is a term of endearment, similar to mama or mother. Okay? So you can imagine Jesus saying, "Mom, this isn't my problem to fix. Why are you going to make me do this?" And how does Mary respond? She doesn't even talk to Jesus. She looks to the servants and she says, "Do whatever he tells you to do." Classic mom move by Mary. And Jesus does the miracle that we're all very familiar with. He turns water to wine. A couple other things that are lost in the English translation is that in most English translations that you read, and I haven't checked, but probably in your pew Bible, it says good wine. It says the master of the feast tastes the wine that's drawn out by the servants, and he says most people give the good wine first, and then they give the bad wine later. What is the case in Greek is that good wine is the type of wine that gets you drunk. And bad wine is essentially fermented grape juice. In Jesus' time, you couldn't drink grape juice like we do today because of bacteria. So fermentation was a way to make it edible, potable. Good wine is strong wine. Good wine is aged wine. So the miracle has this double specialness to it. Not only is it strong wine that used to be water, but it's also aged in a way that it couldn't have been in real life without the miracle. So Jesus takes water and turns it into strong, aged, good wine. And the master of the feast says, usually you would let people drink the strong wine first and then give them the weak wine after they're already drunk. But you have given us the best wine last. What a neat miracle. And it adds to the unlikely nature of the miracle that it is in fact aged as well as strong. The question that Jesus gives to his mother, I think, is really similar to that question we used to ask so wittily in the 90s. And why is that my problem? That sounds like a them problem, not a me problem. He says, woman, what does that have to do with you and me? And it echoes another question that was asked by someone else in the Old Testament. Cain, after he kills Abel, is confronted by God. And God says, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain responds, am I my brother's keeper? Woman, what does that have to do with you and me? How is that my problem? The answer to Cain's question and Jesus' question is implied. What does it have to do with you and me? Everything. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes. Yes, you are. Jesus' mother models here a radical hospitality. Mary cares about even the smallest embarrassment or discomfort. And she recognizes that she can fix it. She can help. She empathized with the host. She knew what they were feeling. And so she set about to ease their suffering. Even though it is a small act, it counts. A small kindness is never wasted. And that is modeled in Jesus' very first miracle. Jesus' coming out party was a wedding where he did a small act of compassion for the host. This small act propels Jesus into his ministry in the Gospel of John. This is what starts Jesus' ministry after his baptism. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus leaves his baptism from John and goes to fast in the desert for 40 days. It's an act of deprecation. It's an act of denial. It's an act of suffering to prepare and fasting. In the Gospel of John, it is not deprivation and fasting that Jesus begins his ministry with. In John, Jesus begins his ministry with an act of hospitality, a kindness, an unnecessary attention to the details of the small things that bring us joy or discomfort. That is how Jesus starts in the Gospel of John. It's almost like Mary is reaching through the page to shake our shoulders and say, you should care about other people's happiness and comfort, not to mention the covering of their basic needs. Our connection to one another makes it impossible for us not to care about one another. It makes it impossible for us to have the cop-out saying that sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. Not only do you matter infinitely, your decisions and actions and your apathy and inaction matters. And your actions or inaction affects everyone and everything in ways that you can't predict or even imagine. In 1867, John Stuart Mill famously gave a speech at the University Address, the University of St. Andrews. And he said something that has become, I think, foundational to the movement of civil disobedience, beginning with Thoreau, moving on to Gandhi, later King, Nelson Mandela, and others. He said, "Let not anyone pacify his conscience by the delusion that he can do no harm if he takes no part, informs no opinion. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. He is not a good man who without a protest allows wrong to be committed in his name, and with the means with which he helps supply, because he will not trouble himself to use his mind on the subject." We cannot afford to not be bothered by the pain and injustice that we see in the world. Because if we trick ourselves into thinking, it's not my problem, I'll take no part, what we actually do is our inaction allows oppression to continue. Our inaction is direct action on the side of the oppressors. The choice between action and inaction is not a choice at all, because to not act is to act. To not fight to discontinue oppression is to work to allow oppression to continue. I'll close with this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by bad people, but the silence over that evil by good people." I hope that we take Mary's example, that we choose to care, recognize that every you problem is a me problem, and we choose to act because our actions matter. They matter and they count. Amen.